There we go. Recording has been started. Welcome everybody to the FRC Sunday night call. I think we might be on episode 70, if you can believe that. I'll have to confirm that when we upload the video tonight to YouTube. But anyway, tonight's call, if you're joining us to talk about battery management, battery maintenance, that topic has been canceled due to sickness. Before the recording started, we were talking about how it seems like everybody is sick right now. Half the teams, half the schools are missing students and teachers and mentors. So due to sickness, due to illness, we have scrambled to the last minute, and I have asked the strategy leaders for Team KnightKrawler 2052 if they would be willing to give a presentation tonight. And so tonight's presenters will be Max and Andrew and Mason from KnightKrawler. I'll let you guys introduce yourself, talk about what other things you do on the team, and maybe your grade as well.
All right.
Take it away. The floor is yours.
I'm Max. I'm a sophomore. I'm a programming student and also our strategy meeting lead. Andrew, Mason.
I'm Mason. Hi, I'm also a sophomore and also a programming student. I think we all are, actually, all three of us. Yeah, me and Andrew are match scouting leads. So we handle the actual scouting of the matches.
Yeah, same. Sophomore programming team, same thing with the scouting tablets with Mason, mainly running that and making sure that the scouting is going appropriately.
All right. Yeah. I think we good to start? All right. Okay, so we threw this up here quickly. So here we go. All right. Team 2052 strategy.
All right. So this is just an overview of what we're going to go over. First, we'll go over the match scouting, like how we match scout, what we're trying to get out of match scouting, and how we train all of our scouters. Then we'll do pit scouting, how we go around the pits, talking to teams, finding out who's able to do what. Oh, some window just opened.
Sorry.
Something. Am I still here? I'm still here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
We can still see you.
And then pre-match scouting, why we do it. This is similar to match scouting, but it's by a smaller group of people, and it's to figure out who we're going to play with that day. Strategy meeting, what we're trying to get out of it, how we've done it in the past and what's new this year. Alliance selection, how we handle that, how we decide who goes on the field, and our pick lists.
All right. Cool.
So first off, for match scouting is our app. It was developed a while ago. It's for Android, FRC Crawler. We run it on 6 tablets, and we give all the 6 tablets out to 6 scouters in scouting shifts. The shifts are normally an hour and a half. So there's 6 scouters and 1 backup scouter that isn't required to be there, but is almost always there. We sync it to the Google Drive twice a day. So once during lunch, so we can get our pre-match. So the pre-match scouting, which we'll talk about later, happens before lunch, because after lunch we have the first scouting data from the morning, so we don't have to pre-match scout anymore. And the app exports to CSV, and that's a pretty easy format for us to use for our strategy app, which we'll also get to later.
All right.
So next, we can just go over the match scouting stuff. So how we match scout and what format. We saw the app earlier. So in the app, it has all of these options here, whether what it does in auto, whether it leaves a starting line, how much correlate intakes, and then it also has how much it scores. So then we can kind of compare those two, see, and then calculate what their accuracy was and how consistent they are with their scoring, and see which side they do, because then we can use our auto and compare it, and then see which autos are compatible with us, which autos are not. A teleop is kind of the same thing. We have the amount of correlate intake and which corals they score on, see how they fit into our strategy, see what their accuracy is, see how consistently they score, that kind of thing. And especially the algae is something that we've been looking a lot into. So whether they score, how many times they score in the processor, how many times they score in the net, where they take their algae from is also very important, like L3 or L2, because then that can tell us what kind of robot it is. And then lastly, with the position, with the end game and climb, something that we also include is whether they tried to climb, because that gives us like whether they have a climbing mechanism, because then oftentimes we can go over there and like help them try to figure out what's going on. And if they can climb like in finals, that's a huge thing that we need to know about. I think that's it for this match scouting thing, Max.
All right. Okay.
Okay, and then this is our training for match scouting. So pretty much every student that isn't doing something like pit crew or drive team is required to scout in our scouting shifts. And so we had an extra after school meeting this year for those who will be scouting, just to go over the guidelines, show them the app, give them like guides on how to fill out the metrics properly. Match comment. We have a thing in our scouting app where you put a comment after each match that you watch, and that's really useful for us because it gives data that you can't really tell from just putting in numbers, like what they were good at specifically and stuff like that. For our week 0, KnightKrawler week 0, which we hosted, we had everybody that hadn't seen the app before, basically all new members. We showed them the actual app so that they're prepared to scout effectively at our first week 1 event. We, for the official week 0 in New Hampshire, we did some practice scouting at the after school meeting. They filled out a Google form and they got like a score back just to see if they did it correctly or not. At the meeting, we go over scouting shifts and make sure there's no conflicts or anything. And then there's a mock strategy meeting. Our strategy meeting we'll get to later in more detail, but we just practice it and we get a good idea for who wants to attend that.
Yeah, we'll just go over a couple teams. I think me, Mason, Andrew, we scouted a couple of matches for teams at the official week 0 and just did a mock strategy meeting based off of that.
Yeah. So next up is pit scouting. This is kind of how we do the pit scouting. We have a notepad/notebook. What we found is that people in the pits or other teams really like the notebook compared to a phone or a tablet or something. Makes it more engaged. They're a lot more receptive to it. We've tried both. Oftentimes, notebook always wins. So with this sheet, we used this last time. It was very nice. It provides pretty much everything that we need to know when we're talking about pit scouting, what kind of robot, like their mechanisms, if they can climb, and what kind of autos they have. It gives us a lot of information that sometimes you don't see in matches, and it's really useful for also putting into that strategy app, which we'll talk about later, so we can kind of eliminate which ones are fit for our strategy and which ones are not. This one's also me. So for pre-match scouting, this is kind of a special thing that we, as the scouting leaders, do, and some other qualified scouters do, because sometimes it's really important to get data on the matches that we're playing in quals, for example. We have to get our own data quickly to the drive team and say, like, this is a strategy, this is what they're capable of, this is what the opposing robots are capable of, here's what I think the best strategy would be for you, or here's the information, you can do what you want with this. So that is done by more experienced scouters. So like the strategy leads, me and Mason, sometimes that's what we'll be doing while overseeing the other scouters, or sometimes we'll give it to other people who have been on the team who are familiar with the scouting setup. And that's what's going to let us be able to do well in quals and to practice that strategy during the matches still. And so we can still engage with the drive team.
All right, cool, move on.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So at every competition, we host a strategy meeting for, it's open to members of our team to show up to. For Duluth, we hosted it in our hotel's conference room. But generally, what we do at the meeting is we identify our pick lists, and then decide, depending on where we're ranked, if we will accept or decline other teams. So for our first pick list, this year at least, we're looking primarily for coral scores, because whilst we can do a lot of good coral action, we can't fill up the reef alone. So yeah, that's our first priority, is finding a good coral score. Then other bonuses, we'd like a consistent auto and a fast climb, just so we can get those extra points. For second pick, this one's always the hard one. This year we're leaning towards either an algae bot or a defense bot, as to not clog up the 2 coral stations. For an algae bot, we'd prefer if they could do things such as ground pickup or net, so that they are both not hovering around the reef with the other 2 coral bots. And net is worth the most net points. Get the pun there. Yeah, and then for defense bot, we tend to look for ones that avoid penalties and have swerve drive, because it generally tends to be more powerful than Tanker Mechanum and is harder to push around, especially this year with, you really have to stand your ground. And something that we tend to look for defense bot, we don't actually look for bots who do defense, as a lot of robots that can do good defense will often end up just doing scoring in quals. So we look for more teams that have a good drive team rather than one who's consistently attempting to do defense. Although if we do see a bot that is doing that and is doing that well, we will, of course, pay attention to that. And then the final list is our no-pick list. This is just a list of teams that we have decided we would like to not pick for a multitude of reasons, including their robot is inconsistent in its actions. We've seen their team do non-GP behavior. If they just generally have some low scoring, they aren't getting too many points, or they have a robot that is contrast to our strategy and just doesn't fit well with us. All right, so for the strategy meeting itself, last year we had essentially just had a giant spreadsheet that we would look at and mark teams and stuff. Most people did not enjoy this, me especially, because very hard to look at. It's just a bunch of raw data, and then it kind of slowed down meetings when you're like, okay, we have this team that we want to look at, where is that, and such like that. So this year, we have, me and Mason mostly, have developed an app that is designed to pull TBA and Statbotics data, as well as take out data from our match scouting and that CSV that we talked about earlier. It does, so far, it's only does some statistical stuff, such as plotting EPA growth over throughout a team's matches. However, we are actively working to increase our the things we can do with this app. We have noted, however, that this year it is so much better. We have pretty much everyone who attended the meeting loved it, especially compared to what we were using in previous years. Yeah, we can probably at the end, we could, if we have time left, we can probably do a bit of a showcase too. All right, and then, okay, alliance selection. Yeah, so this year we have completely new driver selection, alliance selection rules. So we're just going to go over a quick overview of who we have on the field and why. So first, and most importantly, is our team captain, Nicole, who generally is there for, announcing and making sure that everything's running nice and smoothly as we are having these discussions, as well as just as a, another person who can help interpolate and do strategical thinking. Next, we have our drive coach, Pete. He's he's both a build mentor and a strategy mentor, we can say. He generally helps facilitate the overall discussion and aids the discussion between teams, whilst also offering experience and expertise, as he has been on our team for like easily 10 years or something like that. I don't know. And then finally, we have our strategy representative. At Northern Lights, the first regional we went to, this was me. I was on the field with these other two. My general role was to communicate with our full strategy team in the pit, who also, once we made our first pick, met up with the other team's strategy. I also have all the raw data and stuff on the computer I brought onto the field. And was in charge of looking at and showing off our pick list.
Yeah, and we use Slack from the pits down there. We would use Slack to kind of rapidly communicate with the drive team, tell them what's being updated, do our own research down there, and give them kind of a summary of what we decided. And then it's all up to their discretion, of course, though.
Yep, of course. And then, all right.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep. So this is for when you're on the field, alliance selection, your first and second pick. The first pick, all of this should go fairly easily depending on how our strategy meeting went. Last regional, the second pick list, our list was a little short and we were kind of scrambling at the end. But ideally, with a good strategy meeting, you should be in a good place when you go into alliance selection. The first pick, I think, as we said before, is an easier choice for us this year because it's mainly just a high scoring robot. It's not that deep. It's just the highest scoring robot that you can get. The second pick is more variable because it kind of depends on the strategy of the regional. Like if algae is a big thing, then you probably want a good algae robot. If defense has been being really big, then you probably want a defense robot. It's important to note how other alliances and your alliance are being constructed. And it also matters your first pick a lot because they might have their own opinions on what your second pick should be. Yeah. Then you announce your pick to the judge if you're the alliance captain.
Right. And then just a final thing. Now that I've been on the field and have a bit more expertise, and now that there are more people on the field, it's important to make sure that you're working well with the other team that is on the field with you. This assumes you're either a captain or a first pick. So just generally, being GP is the best thing you can do. Being a good person and being nice to the other people you're working with, not being overpowering, I'll say. You got to make sure that the discussion stays on track. You don't have a lot of time this year. It's very much you're watching the clock as you slowly run out of time to come up with your decision. This is especially prevalent if you're probably one of the later seeds, as you have less time between your first and second pick. The alliance captain gets the last say. So if you are the first pick and you and the alliance captain are having a disagreement, it is up to the alliance captain what team gets chosen. So just keeping that in mind. Just some general things to make sure you're doing is you're sharing all your data. If anyone has a question about your data, you have to share that with the other team you're working with. You share your pick list, of course, and you compare the lists and have a discussion. And then finally, no bad ideas. You need to make sure that everybody on the field is open to talking about, anything they can say, anything that comes to their mind. All right, and then.
Okay. And then strategy games. This is something that our team has been doing for a few years, I think. A mentor runs it. This year there's two. Last year was only the alliance selection one. This year in the scouting app, there's actually there's a slider where you predict the score that your alliance will get in that match. And then you do some statistical analysis, and whichever scouting shift got the most accurate predictions wins a prize. Similar is the alliance selection one, where a Google form on the day before alliance selection happens. It's all the teams at the event, and you pick 24 teams, and whoever predicts the most amount of teams that make it to elims wins and gets a prize. Both of these games are meant to increase strategic thinking, and especially the match score one, they're meant to so you converse with the other scouters and get more passionate about strategy.
Yeah, Mason, you won the alliance selection one this year.
I did, yeah.
We did. This kind of strategic thinking is really important because our strategy meetings are open to everyone on the team. So whoever has input into our strategy meeting is going to be very useful to have. The more voices, the more ideas, the better.
Yeah, and I think a big thing that we were wondering is how other teams handle scouting, your infrastructure. If you have an app, if you just do it on Google Sheets or something, because this year, I think our training went well. Maybe not enough people attended because we had a bit more of inconsistent and incorrect data. So we were just wondering what other teams do for scouting. Dominic, go ahead.
Let's see. This year we were the first. We tried out using QR Scout, which was an interesting process of using. It's I don't remember the team number, but it's Red Hawk Robotics. Some team, you can find it on Chief Delphi. It is really nice because it's offline for the scouting devices. And then you just need one laptop connected to the internet to input your data into the spreadsheet. So that was super nice. It had way better like UI from Google Forms, which was what we used previously. And so that's what we used. Our scouters really liked it. And I think in terms of scouting training, we're a little bit unique because we did the Scouting Alliance with all the other teams. So we actually have like scouting parties where we invite other teams to our shop to show off and like train on the scouting system. And then we also, or what I am going to do for 10K, is making a video for scouting training to sort of go through watching a match and explaining the scouting system. And so that teams can share that with their scouters if they're not able to make it to the scouting party.
Okay. Do you know how well the scouting training works? Like, is your data pretty consistent and trustworthy? Have you found that?
We were looking at that yesterday. It wasn't the best. We had to scrap our entire endgame data Friday night because we realized that it was just that bad. But we're swapping over to using the API for some of our data points, which is super helpful. But we've found that it's relatively good. I think we always take our data with a grain of salt because we have like 30 different people scouting at competitions from the different teams, and you have no clue how well they know the game. But we try and find bad data during the competition. We have a couple people who like go through the data and are like, oh, that team didn't actually play that match. That must be a different team that they scouted. And so thinking about having people at the event going through our raw data and seeing how can we fix this?
Right, I think Trevor, you raised your hand.
Yeah, we started using that as well this year, and it seemed like there was a lot less like errors than we've had in the past. We did notice that sometimes team numbers got a little bit weird, so there'd be like stats. I think there was like a team 0 at one point when we were looking at our spreadsheet, which like doesn't exist. But for the most part, it definitely seemed like improved from what we've been using in the past few years.
Nice. All right. Any other comments or questions? Mark, yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering what, between the time that you gather all of your data on Friday and the time you have a pick list on Saturday, in the meeting where you develop the pick lists, how do you organize that?
Like what part are you like, the making the pick list itself or organizing the data, or
when you have your maybe all of the above, when you have your team together on Friday night and you have the raw data and you have it organized the way that you have displayed, do you get in small groups and do people look at different aspects, or
no,
how
we have
how do you work that out?
Well, we essentially have a meeting table. Our strategy meetings are small enough that it's that we can have one big group. I think maybe we had 10 people at Duluth. And it's very much most people are just thinking, and then as we slowly just go through each team and decide stuff. Most of the gathering of data and putting in one place has been automated by our new app, which we can go over here after questions. But yeah, no, we go through each team. Typically, some people will have like, all right, this is who we're thinking for our first pick. And then, yeah, we'll just go through teams and make that list.
So normally at this last one, we don't normally go through all the teams. I should clarify that. We don't like go through each individual team, check each one out. We usually have like a list of teams that we know that we are going to be interested in. Oh, Scott, you had a question?
You can finish your thought. Go ahead, continue your thought, and then I'll ask my question.
Okay, yeah. So we don't normally go through every single individual robot. We what we did last time was we knew what we were looking for, either an algae or defense robot. So we went through, and the robots that didn't really fit that, we marked them as like, these guys don't fit our strategy as well. And then we went from that list, and that could help us narrow it down. So it wasn't as much like evaluating each robot individually. It was more, we had a few that we were definitely interested in and that we used the data to explore further. And then we used a lot more of the data to get our second picks and like go through those. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thanks.
So my question is, and it's more of a confirmation because I popped in and out of your strategy meeting a little bit, but it didn't stay too long for any period of time. But by the end of the night, Friday, you basically have your pick list, and then you spend Saturday fine tuning it. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. It's mostly just we keep an eye on the teams at the top of the list, making sure that the robot doesn't like implode. Or
keep an eye on. We had in our list of robots that we made for first pick and second pick, we had people have scouting shifts assigned to them for pre-match scouting. Same kind of our strategy leaders, same kind of experienced scouters that we had on pre-match scouting, so that we would be able to keep an eye on them, see if their performance changes in this last day or something. It is something that we need to know before selecting them.
Yeah, we use that a lot. Last event where there's these top scores that are just so close, and the only like real way to differentiate between them is to see how they perform the next day.
Mm-hmm. Scott?
So I know because I'm inside KnightKrawler and I hear the conversations that are happening. You guys said that you wish you had a deeper second pick list. Are there things that you are planning to do differently at the next competition in your process to accomplish that? Do you think that you'll go through every single robot, or do you think that you'll just change your process some?
I mean, yeah, part of it is we need to see what happens at the event for the quals matches, because if there's like a much more even playing field with a lot more like high scoring robots, we'll definitely have to go through probably every team. But if it's like it was at our first regional, where there's just a couple like really high scoring robots, and then we can just look through the rest for the metrics we want to see, it won't change that much. What I think will probably change more is our data gathering process. And we're upgrading our app to make searching for those teams faster.
Something I also don't think that something that we're probably going to do different for the second pick is to give the drive team how to use them, because we didn't realize how uninformed our drive team was about like our strategy that we were making with them in the pits at the time. So I think next time we should make a more detailed list of how we would use the robot specifically, because that would definitely help our performance in things like finals once we actually do get them. Oh, yes, Trevor?
Do you have your drive team at your scouting meeting, or is it just scouters?
It's the drive team is there as well, yes.
And then AE.
Hi. Yeah, I'm wondering how much from your pick list you are going out and kind of talking with those teams that are maybe in your top tier, maybe even in your second tier, ahead of time to avoid the deadly, decline of acceptance? How much are you collaborating with other teams when you anticipate you're going to be an alliance captain, or do you just, not do that?
Yeah, I mean, for Northern Lights, we were first seed, so essentially we went up to Wild Stings, who were going to be our first pick, and like, hey, if we asked you, would you say yes? They said no. They had their own ideas and wanted to start their own alliance. But yeah, I think then we talked to Huskies, who we haven't ended up choosing, and they said yes, we will say yes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I wonder if you view that as a sort of essential, or you're willing to, you're willing to wing it at the time, or how much you view a value in that collaboration ahead of time, knowing.
Yeah, I think it really just depends where you are in the like what you seeded. If you're down like 4 or 5, it's maybe not the best decision to ask your first pick in the scenario that they like say no and use that, or maybe another team chooses them and then they have all of the strategy stuff that you gave to them. But if you're seated up higher, yeah, you pretty much have to ask just so that you can be like, yeah, hey, are you going to say yes or no? And they're like, oh, we're going to say no. And then you can refocus your efforts.
Yeah, sometimes we found that asking them was not a good way to, because that's not as GP if we went around like making it clear who our picks were. So for things like our second pick, it's more important to have a little bit of anonymity, to be like more anonymous in who you're going to be choosing, because it's not as graciously professional to like get people's hopes up or to make false promises. So we usually try to keep it very on the low down about who we're choosing. We tell all of our team members to be, if any team comes up to us asking, hey, who are you choosing, to say that's not up to me. And we all go through that to make sure that we're respecting everyone and making sure that we're still being professional to every team in the whole event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions or anything? Is anyone else raising their hand? I think I saw a couple people. I don't know if they...
I raised my hand briefly, but Scott
yeah.
beat me by a couple seconds, and he asked the exact same thing: as what do we want to change for Minneapolis?
Yeah. All right.
So, yeah, I mean, that was my only question: is what we want to get more involved with between what we want to improve and what worked well, what didn't work well. But you guys have kind of been hitting most of those bullet points.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Do people want to see the strategy app we've developed this year? Is that something people are interested in looking at? Oh, okay. All right. I've got it booted up here. Hold on. I can.
Max, is there any data in the strategy app that you wouldn't want to show? I just want to be
match. I won't show match comments.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just stick to a couple teams to show.
We always try to encourage students to be GP even on match comments, which should stay internal, but
yep,
you never. Some students, you do your best. You do the best you can.
All right. Okay. Oh, give me a second. Is it Sharon? No, I don't think so. Oh. All right, my whole. Oh. Okay.
While you're booting that, I'll ask another question. Sort of at the end of the day, who gets the most pull, or whose comments or what data has the most weight in your decision making? Is it the anecdotal drive team comment? Is it the seasoned match watchers? Is it, the data, pure and simple? where do you fall in that spectrum, or can't say?
I say we do favor the match comments of the scouting data where the data is consistent and like it makes sense and it's correct, because then you can trust that pretty well. I'd say also generally the we do favor the like pre-match scouting of the experienced scouters, I think, more than the average scouting data. Do you have anything to add to that, Andrew?
No, I think that pretty much nails it. We mainly rely on the match comments, but again, those can be a little bit less reliant, and we generally trust the data itself a little bit less because of how messy that can get with the different teams, people scouting the wrong robot. So yeah, we mainly focus on the match comments, and then we include recently this year we've had it so that they put their initials on the match comment, so that if there is a robot or like there's a match where it's really important, then we can go like talk to them about it. Like if someone put a match that said robot was looked to be damaged during this match, then we can go and ask them like what happened and if that really affects our strategy. Because if this was a robot that we really needed and it got damaged, then we need to talk to that person and see what actually happened.
Yeah.
One thing that might be helpful for the audience is I think it would be good to share what percentage of your strategy meeting. So the strategy meeting was what, like 90 minutes, something like that, 2 hours. What percentage of that conversation was students and what percentage of it was mentors?
Last meeting, it was almost all students. There was basically no mentors there. A
I
few
don't
were
think
there just to supervise, but none really decided to contribute to the conversation.
think-
which I think is
Yeah, I don't think a single mentor inputted on our actual strategy. So
And then when it comes to, so you come out of that meeting with your initial pick list, and then you kind of tweak and kind of massage that pick list in Saturday morning. What do you guys feel was the mentor input on the pick list following strategy meeting until you were on the field picking robots?
the mentors usually didn't provide a specific strategy or specific robots. What I found was most common was they would provide very useful information. We had people giving us very useful information from the pits, from the actual matches themselves, stuff that we wouldn't notice normally or that wasn't present in the scouting data that was very useful in our strategy. So it's less input on what strategy to choose, but more information that is very, very useful.
I apologize. This is taking a little longer than I had expected.
Are you debugging your app, Max? Is that maybe
No, the app is up and running. It's actually the share feature. It just does not want to share my screen.
Huh. Have you tried sharing a window versus an entire screen, or vice versa?
Well, I tried to originally do the window, and then I
Uh-huh.
tried to just do the entire screen.
Weird.
But
Hmm.
the only thing that's working right now is sharing a Google Chrome tab.
Weird.
Which
Oh, are you on a Mac?
yeah,
Yeah, there's a permission thing that you have to do to allow you to share other windows on a Mac, and I don't think you can do that unless you leave the meeting, change the setting, and then come back.
okay, all right. So maybe no demo for today then, unless Mason, do you know if you have that fixed on your computer?
I could try it. In the meantime, I was wondering about other teams' pit scouting. Do you guys do it digitally or on notebooks? And how much do you do it? Do you try to pit scout every single team, or what's your approach? Dominic, go ahead.
We completely redid our pit scouting this year, taking a page out of Citrus Circuits' book. And we had 3 different pairs of pit scouts try and pit scout every team by Thursday. I think it ended up being that one pair got most of the teams done by the end of the competition. One pair got all of the teams done by Friday lunch, and another pair, I don't even know. But we had robot robustness scouts, autonomous scouts, and then strategy / vibe scouts. And so those were really helpful for us in the pick list meeting, being able to say, hey, especially when we're looking at defense bots, our robot robustness scouts were able to say, oh yeah, that robot won't break during playoffs, or oh yeah, that robot had a rat's nest of wires. We should consider not picking them because we wouldn't be able to fix their electronics. And so that was super helpful for us. And then that actually meant that in Duluth, we didn't have either of our teammates break, as opposed to last year where both of our playoff alliances had at least one robot that broke. So that was super helpful. And then our autonomous pit scouts actually were able to go around to the other teams at the competitions that didn't have a move auto, and work with them to program an auto so that we could get that auto rank point every match, which meant that at Duluth, at Northern Lights at least, every single team by the end of the competition had at least one match where they moved off the starting line.
Yeah, I think we did something similar with helping a bunch of teams with autos. I know I helped at least 2.
Yeah. For those pit scouting, Dominic, did you use physical or digital? And like, did you use a Google form, upload it automatically to a Google Sheet, or where did you store your data?
It was a little bit weird because of the fact that we had each pair try and scout every team. We did have a Google form that uploaded to our Google Sheet, but also the pairs tended to keep their own notes anyways. And so they just made sure that they came to the pick list meeting and had their notes handy and, said, here are our notes on this team, and whatever.
Okay, so it's less about more like the raw data, and it was actually the professionals who knew what each team was. So then if you had a question about their strategy, you could ask those people.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
All right. Mason, is it working for you?
It could be. It's at the point where I have to restart Google Chrome. So I could go ahead and do that. But
yeah.
Are there any other things?
We could probably, could we demo the Google Sheets with the new stuff that we added, or no?
I mean, I think it's fairly simple. Basically, we didn't do this last competition, but this competition we're gonna try to get our pit scouting data into a Google form, because before each team just writes everything down in a notebook, takes pictures, and then either just holds onto it and attends a strategy meeting or puts it into a Slack thread. We thought it'd be easier to have one dedicated person take everyone's pit scouting and upload it into a Google form, which automatically goes into a sheet, so that we can access all the team's data much easier.
Since I'm not at the strategy meeting, I'm just curious, is our first pick generally more quantitative and our second pick qualitative? Is it more, just comments for our second pick?
For second pick, it's well, when we're looking for algae scores, we do just make sure that they can score algae, and we'll watch a couple matches just to make sure it's consistent.
Okay.
But yeah, no, mostly qualitative for second pick.
And I was wondering for other teams, we've heard how you gather your scouting data, but how do you use it and display it? Is it just a giant spreadsheet, or is there some easier way that you guys use to display your data? Go ahead, Ben.
So I'm on the same team as Trevor, DNA. We use the Red Hawk Robotics QR thing. So then one of our students just scans it into their phone into a Google Sheet. And then we have a pivot table that will average each team so that we can get each team's average. And then we just have a few more that we can just look up specific team, their averages and all of their matches, and kind of see throughout the competition how they were doing it and when. And then we're just kind of adding stuff so that when our drive team is in the pits talking to the other teams, they have the alliance data right there so they can see all 3 robots at once and kind of help develop a strategy and be we can do L4 reliably. We've noticed you guys aren't as reliable, so would you consider doing L3 or L2? But yeah, it's just a giant spreadsheet.
Yeah, no, a giant spreadsheet. Whilst it might be easy to set up, I think it could probably be replaced by something better, which is what we're hoping to do for this app. AE, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to answer the question. I'm sorry, I don't see any of our students who are on strategy from 2530 here. But I'm just going to say this is certainly an area where we're trying to improve. We have our own, one of our students wrote an app for the pit scouting and match scouting collection, Turbo Scout, that uploads through Discord. So all of our team members just go around the pits and can watch matches and upload data. And the data goes off into, as far as I'm concerned, the ether, and then comes out through another student who puts it all together. That's my understanding of all things. And I think that's the key, is that there's a synthesis of data at the end, because the data really gets overwhelming, I think. And I think that's where all of you students who are doing that job of putting all the data into meaningful kernels of information that the drive team can use and the strategist can use is so key, and where our learning curve is, honestly. And I think that's supplemented by a few key people on the team who have watched enough matches to have a good eye. And, you know, that's a few mentors. That's honestly like a team grandma, a few students who just have that eye and give us paper comments that we add to that and bring into our discussions. And it's all meaningful in the final meeting, but just thought I'd throw that out there. That's how that we're still working on this. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to use data plus qualitatives in a meaningful fashion and get better at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice. Dominic?
Yeah, one thing we like to do for those comments is we actually make a Slack channel and post every single team number in that Slack channel as a separate message. And then people can put in the thread, they put a photo of the pit scouts put a photo of that robot. And then if like there's an interesting thing that they do in a certain match, like people can put a comment in there beyond the comments that they put in the scouting system. Or then non-scouts who are watching matches can put comments in there. And so that's helpful when we're searching for a team for pick list. We can look at that team in the Slack channel, and everyone has access to that Slack channel to add those comments.
Oh, that's actually interesting. I might have to take a look at seeing how hard that would be to implement. Scott?
I have a question for the other teams on here. For KnightKrawler, if you don't already have a job at an event, so pit crew, drive team, taking photos for the media group, you're scouting, and every student has a job, and that job is going to be scouting if it's not something more explicit or more demanding or more important, or however you want to classify it. I'm curious if other teams are doing the same thing where they're involving every single student, or if they have scouts that are better trained, more reliable. I'm not sure the right way to describe it, but I'm curious to know if scouting is sort of an elite function of your team, or if it's something that everyone does.
I think Trevor raised his hand.
Yeah, we pretty much do the same thing. If you're not like on drive team or in the pit and you're just in the stands, you just are a scouter, or you're the scouting lead that's controlling all the scouters, pretty much.
Yeah. How do people like feel about how many people they're getting scouting? Is everyone easily being able to fill up a good 6-person scouting team, so every robot has one, or are people more struggling to make sure that every robot is being scouted for every match?
That'll definitely come down to how big your team is. For us, we never have trouble with 6 people, and we debate doing 12 sometimes.
Oh, wow.
Scott, to your initial point, we do have it as a function that everyone's involved with. If you're at an event and you're not, a part of any other team, you're scouting. I'm starting to second guess that, though, only because when you get people who are scouting who don't want to be scouting, you get bad data. if people don't want to be there, they're going to do a worse job, right? And one thing we've ran into the last few years is having to redo a whole bunch of data from people who clearly didn't want to be scouting to begin with. So I'm starting to get into a mindset that maybe we're better off putting the people there who want to be there, and then finding other things for other people to do that are productive and valuable and engaging for them.
Yeah, I think we might have had a similar issue at our first regional.
Yeah, that's something that we should take into account, I think, as strategy leads.
2530 totally agrees. I like the quality of data you get is really dependent on the people you have putting it in, right? And sometimes that's some of our least busy people, least critical people at regionals, and least trained people. And so that can be problematic. As far as how we deal with it, we have rotations for pit and scouting so that everybody gets exposed to everything. And that has its pluses and minuses. That's currently how we do it.
Right. Trevor? Want to go ahead?
Yeah, that was definitely something I realized just from personal experience. My freshman year scouting is we had like not that many rotations. We pretty much had 3 matches of break in between, and we kind of reworked that last year. I think this year how we're doing it is we have like hour block shifts, so you get a lot more time to like, relax and just watch matches, and then you get back to scouting for a bit. But from what I've seen, it's made scouters a lot less burnt out and more engaged with their scouting.
And then yeah, I agree. And then Mark?
Yeah, it's been nice for us to be in the Scouting Alliance with No Mythic, and I'm on a 3926 Emperors, and that means that we don't have as many people at a time scouting, and with the rotation and the pit rotation and things, it's nice people don't get as burnt out as they used to. One thing I was going to piggyback on what Ryan said, if we were to reduce the number of scouters to try to get better data and find other things for those other people to do, we'd want to make sure that those other things are not a lot more appealing than the scouting, because then nobody would want to scout. And we always struggle, as you are, many of you are alluding to, we struggle with a lot of people that don't necessarily want to do it.
Yeah, I guess making the scouting more appealing would be a big part of this with the breaks. I think that's a good idea. Oh, Dominic?
Mark, can you nudge Samaya to respond to my email?
Yep, I will do it.
Thank you.
Is there any progress with Mason?
Yeah, Mason, how's it going?
I think I could present it.
Yeah. Give it a try.
Yeah. Window.
Oh, don't do that.
Oh.
Don't do the entire
okay.
Okay. Is this working?
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
See it.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I've already imported
all the data.
Northern Lights. Yeah, all of our teams. This is all of our scouting data. Hold the match comments. Yeah. This is what it looks like. It's just scouting data at the top. Then this is from the Blue Alliance. The reason there's gaps is because these are finals matches. I think we pulled it out for testing, but normally they'll be there. Yeah, it's just a match number if they won or lost. Their EPA from StatBotics at that moment in time. This is a graph. This is helpful. It's just like a general trend of how that team's day went. If it's going up, they're probably doing pretty well. Then these videos, these are really nice during the strategy meeting when perhaps a scouter put some incorrect data into the system, and we just wanted to check like if there was some interesting data, or like it appealed to us. Like if there was a bunch of algae, then we probably want to look at that to consider putting them on our second pick list. And to make sure that actually happened, we go to the match number and we watch the video, and we can confirm or deny that information.
Yeah, we ended up watching a lot more videos than we had hoped to, just because of our some inconsistent scouting and pit data, but also just because we wanted to get familiar with the robots. So I think that that's something that we'll look in the future about PIS scouting is including the pictures in a better place and everything, and making sure that we have all the rest of the data can be more reliant.
Yep. Yeah. The general idea for this app was that you use all this data and then you can pick if a team, it's how compatible they are with your strategy. So if you think you would want them a lot, then you say very compatible, all the way down to not compatible. And then there's every team in here. Is there anything, Max or Andrew, you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, so this is generally what we had at Northern Lights. The 2 tabs you see at the top, other than the Alliance Selection one, are ones that we have added since. And then, yeah, at the very bottom, then, if you click the Alliance ranking button, this is then where we can rank our overall alliance and then export it as a list. So yeah, you can drag them down like that.
Yeah. So normally they're assigned point values based on what we rank them, either very compatible, or all those things. It'll give us a nice list of which ones we ranked highest, which ones we ranked lowest, and that'll be a good base to start from with our first and second pick lists.
Mm-hmm. I think we also use this to make the no pick list. Right. Oh, Scott,
yeah, we do.
Can you go back to the previous screen? I'm curious if you can show the KnightKrawler data, because we had, I think, our second and third match, we only had 2 robots on the field, and then was it our 4th and 5th match where we had a CAN bus issue and we didn't even move? Is that easy to see in this data when there's sort of anomalies in a match? Does that show up here at all?
Not like explicitly. You just have to see that it's either all zeros or there's a comment that says that.
Yeah, so that's why for every team you want to read all the comments, or at least skim them. And then I think you set this up with us being the base team, so you can't see your own statistics.
Yeah,
currently.
There's a gap here.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Maybe we should probably add that at some point. Maybe we could have the base tab show your own statistics.
Something to kind of add on to that was the EPA. One thing that we found was that our EPA on Stepbotics and our score, like our average match points in Blue Alliance, was a lot lower than some of the other robots. So because of those matches with 2 robots where it's just kind of harder to get those extra points. So we ended up, and I think we're going to include this later, we're going to have, using the scouting data, we just average out the match, like each individual team, how much points they get in a match, and average them out over the rest of the matches. And that might not be as accurate with some inaccurate scouting data, but it is going to be useful if we want to get the individual team instead of what's given by Blue Alliance and Stepbotics most of the time.
Yeah, I was really curious because we had a very, I think we probably had a very unusual regional where we had multiple matches with only 2 robots on the field. We had multiple matches where we crossed the field and scored in the other team's processor to get the co-opetition instead of staying and scoring Coral. All of those things I don't think show up in normal stats, which, like you said, would push down your overall EPA because you're spending time doing things like scoring in the other team's processor to get the tiebreaker. And I'm just curious. I was curious to see if that would have shown up here, but obviously if we're somehow a baseline, then I can see why you can't tell.
Yeah. We could, I mean, if we are like looking at another team that has something similar happen, is probably easier to tell. Again, just reading the match comments, if you had a good scouter, they'll say, oh, this was a 2v3, so they were at a disadvantage, and such. So, yeah, it's generally just hard to tell. Maybe we could come up with some statistical modeling to see if there was, to find outliers, but that's might be a little difficult.
Yeah. Again, all this data, you kind of have to take all of it with a grain of salt, especially EPA. It's just a number that's guessed by Stepbotics.
Oh, Ryan Swanson?
Yeah, I'm jumping in late. I joined the meeting like 15 minutes ago, but just some overall thoughts, maybe a positive question for the group. So this game is a game where your performance is generally pretty well tracked by EPA. Obviously, there are things Scott mentioned that If you're playing a 2v3 or if you're doing weird things like scoring in the opponent processor is going to deviate. But in general, EPA is a pretty good metric this year. And almost to the discussion about, trying to minimize the number of scouters we have during an event. We're talking about actually just using Statbotics heavily to, pick the top 15 teams. And then after the event, on Friday night, we'll just review footage on all of those teams and, spot check it with our top scouters, top strategy people. And then do the same for, I guess, focus our scouts' attention on our second pick priority, which is going to be in this game likely algae and defense. And I don't see that deviating even at high levels of play. So we'll be having our scouts focus on subjective metrics more than data because it's hard to get to use a metric to quantify a defensive robot, if you will. One other thought I'm going to throw out there is that I heard people talking about pit scouting. I think the most useful element of pit scouting is for getting kids to talk to other kids. Overall, it's largely worthless in terms of data. Like things like robot weight, they don't matter. Things like, how many wheels are on your robot? They don't matter. What does matter is getting kids out there. So I do see value in it, but in general, I think it's a waste of time. Just my thoughts.
I think the one good thing that can come out of it is getting photos of robots because it's much better so you can get an up close, in-depth photo that then you can look at to be like, okay, so instead of looking at it from like trying to see their robot from a video and be like, okay, what is that exactly doing? You have a more high definition photo of exactly like the robot. And typically, I think our pit scouters try to get multiple angles as well.
Yeah, that's all we do with pit scouting. We take a photo and we ask them how many batteries they have. That's the only other relevant thing we can't figure out by watching them on the field.
Right. Trevor, you raising your hand?
Yeah, that's definitely something that's helped in the past is, there's a lot of teams that are regional. So when you sit and go, oh, what was this team again? Like when you pull up a picture, you go, oh, that's that team. I remember that robot. It really helps with your scouting and your pick lists and all that.
We can go over new additions we've added since to the app since Northern Lights. We want to go over the sort teams or filter teams tab.
Sure. Yeah, we just added this thing. If you're trying, this is mainly for second picks as well. If you're just trying to find a second pick, you just want to see like all the teams with the EPA greater than 10, probably most teams. Just gives you a list of all of them. Probably useful mostly for algae, so you can say, give me a list of all the teams that have scored a decent amount of algae.
Yeah, and I think there's a way you can search strings as well to see like, oh, what all teams managed to deep climb and stuff like that as well.
Yep.
Trevor again, yeah.
I guess one thing I'm wondering is like, how do some of the teams here approach their like pre-scouting for like a second regional? Because I know we did that yesterday. We had some scouters back at the school that were looking at some of the teams that'll be at Seven Rivers with us for the next regional.
Andrew, I think you have been working on that a bit. Do you want to talk about how we've been preparing for our next regional?
Yeah, so we have been looking at the list provided, who we know is going to be at the next regional, and then we're planning on putting together like a meeting, like a scouting Saturday or something, where we can have the scouters practice, or the people on the team that would be scouting practice on these robots, because then that one gets us data and two trains them. So we've just been going over, they're scouting the robots in their past regionals and maybe their week zeros. So just looking back at their matches.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we did. Is we had like our drive team, some of our drive team, not all of our drive team, and like our programmers at practice field yesterday. And then while they were there, we had like our scouters come to the school for a few hours and do all that.
And then Dominic, you raised your hand.
How effective do you find that pre-scouting data to be? Because I know we have thought about doing pre-scouting, especially like when it comes to champs and whatever, but like at least for us, we think of the fact that between week 1 and week 5, a team could completely change their robot, right? I think of like 70-28 last year, right? And it's like, how helpful is that pre-scouting data, and how do you use it effectively at your second regional?
So yeah, a lot can change. Like for instance, last year we completely redid our robot. We made an entirely new robot with an under the bumper intake instead of an over the bumper. But for the most part, if you can see their strategies for the first regional, maybe see like what their robot's like, I would say most of the time the data is still similar. They probably got better, and there hasn't been a ton of major changes. And then if there is a major change, you can see that, and you can see the change to their strategy at the second regional and what they've done to improve for that.
All right. Pete?
Yeah, so I think this year, for good or for bad, I'm pretty sure that the better alliance is going to win most matches. There's not a whole lot you can do in qualification matches. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to pre-scout an alliance and say this robot's going to do great, so we're going to send a defensive robot at you. Qualification match 1, teams are just going to be trying to show what they can do. So I'm not sure pre-scouting is going to change a lot of matches, but I think it does have value in showing your scouts how to scout, showing your scouts what they actually want, like what sort of data we're going to be looking for on Friday night. After we actually have data from the regional, which is usually after match 3. So once we push real data at lunchtime on Friday, that's when we can actually determine whether a strategy can be taken to overtake another alliance.
All right. I think AE, you raised your hand first.
Yeah, I was just gonna say pre-scouting, as someone who's done a lot of that, I love to, it's been fun to watch all you guys who were at Duluth and just watch every single one of your matches. Not gonna lie, I'm kind of into that, but it gives me questions to ask you when I'm gonna be at the same regional that you're at. Did you fix this? How did you, like what were you thinking when this happened? So I view it as a way to have some questions in hand when I come to talk to you for scouting, or not when I do, but when my students do.
Trevor?
Yeah, I agree with the whole like asking questions thing. And like Peter was saying, I think the main benefit of it is that when you do the pre-scouting, all your scouters, they're scouting, they're practicing, they're really getting like the reps in. And it really helps them, especially like with us using a new system this year, it really helps them get even better at doing their scouting. And, we've made some changes, so it helps with the changes that we've made to our scouting, even since our first regional, to really get them in practice and, better qualitative data for our next regional.
Right, yeah. All right. Any other questions, comments, funny tidbits? Yeah, Chris.
So our team has maybe 4 or 5 scouters. How do you, of those teams here on the call, I know it sounds like there's some larger teams. Any teams here that have less than 6 scouters, how do you handle trying to dissect that data when it's not complete?
Dominic?
I'm speaking from a larger team, but one of the biggest things for us is that being part of that scouting alliance, connecting with local teams, so that you don't have to always have all of your scouts on at the same time, right? I think, like, I remember we work with 2177, the Robettes, and they maybe bring 12 students to the competition. And so they contribute maybe only 1 or 2 scouts at a time to our scouting rotation, which is super helpful for them so that they, have enough students in their PID and for drive team and whatever. And so connecting with other local teams to do a scouting alliance is super helpful. But I think also thinking about, do you need to scout every team at the event, every match? I think there are I've heard of some teams that have limited scouters, and they, rather than scouting robots, they scout alliances in qualification matches, and then you're able to sort of see how alliances play together. And so then you, in theory, only need 2 scouts. You need a scout for the red alliance and a scout for the blue alliance. But that's less quantitative data, and that's more qualitative data.
All right, Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, we have a fairly decent sized team, but last year we had a scouting alliance with 5690 because they were at both of our regionals, and it definitely helps, especially like just taking the load off the scouter's hands if you have another team helping you with your scouting, because you can just, you can share your data across, you can have more rotations, and it's just fun to just be with other teams, just kind of cooperate with each other.
When you guys do these alliances, do you create those weeks in advance, or does it sometimes happen when you're up there?
Ben?
Yeah, so for us, like last year was kind of the first year since I've been on the team where we worked with other teams, 5690, like Trevor said, and then also Hermantown when we went down to Colorado with both of them. And that one we kind of had talked about it, but we didn't really have a plan until we got to competition. So it might be just like going on Chief Delphi and just like any teams at this competition that are doing this, or like even like just we looked at Blue Alliance this year and like, are there any teams that are going to be at both of them? And we're like, do we reach out and just do it? But like with our team, we are big, but might not have enough people to fully cover rotation at the second comp. So we're just kind of trying to figure out kind of the same boat where it's like, what data are we going to be looking at, and how do we make sure we're at least scouting all the teams if it's not every match, and maybe it's going back then after the competition ends and just rewatching those matches or whenever we have a free moment.
Trevor?
Yeah, kind of building off of what Ben said, it's also perfectly fine to ask other teams if you can use their scouting data. They might not say yes, but there's probably at least one team that is willing to. I know we had a team reach out this year and they asked if someone could give them some scouting data, and we were like, yeah, we can do that. And it just really helps everyone out, if you don't have enough scouters.
I have a question for the teams about where do you put your scouters? It seems like it's always a challenge for KnightKrawler of, are the scouts next to everyone else? Do we split them up and put some on the blue side and some on the red side? Do the scouts scout up high? Do they scout from down low, closer to the field? I'm curious to know if this is a thing that gets discussed in other teams, or if this is somehow something that KnightKrawler tends to talk about all of the time.
All right, I think Dominic raised his hand first.
We tend to have our scouts be with our team just so that they can cheer and feel like they're part of the team. But something this year that we realized was some of our scouts need to update their glasses prescription. And so we actually were sort of forced to be closer to the field so that they could see the scoreboard. So I think that was something important for our team, to be able to be close down near the field, so that people could read the numbers on the bumpers and read the scoreboard. And also the top of the stands in Duluth gets so hot, we didn't want our scouts up there.
All right, and then Ryan.
Yeah, typically we would, I'd like to keep all my scouts together. We try to find a central location. We have them get there early to the event and everything. However, this year, I think with the sight lines, having a red side and a blue side and splitting them up might be advantageous. I know from one side, it can be difficult to see the exact scoring on the other side of the field. So we're looking at splitting this year, and I think that's probably where we're going to land.
That's what KnightKrawler did as well.
One thing that we did, just because some of our students were in the similar position, not being able to see everything, like one or two of our students actually brought binoculars, and we realized that they're really good because it's like at NLR, we kind of sat middle, like we were probably like as middle as you can be, and then we were right around the entrance, like a few rows up of that. So seeing like the starting positions, it was kind of hard just with the barge and everything. But using the binoculars, we were able to kind of see where those were, and then some students were able to see the actual screen better just using them. So if any teams have access to binoculars, I would suggest just bringing one or two pairs.
Yeah, we might want to investigate that. How do people feel about like getting into like the venue to get these seats? Because it's always a big rush, or at least it was for Northern Lights. It was a big rush in. Everyone was lining up at the doors to try and get in as soon as the arena opened. Were people able to get the seats that they needed for scouting, or was it very much you have to compromise and find less promising seats? Kaisen?
I know for us, at least in previous years, we were like one of the last teams there. We just kind of had to take one of the back seats in the arena because we didn't have much choice, and we just worked with it. But it's kind of just a game of chance, if anything.
Yeah, probably depends on the venue as well.
Well, it seems like we're slowly running out of topics here. We're getting close to the end anyway. Does anyone want to make a last call here for questions or comments?
Scott, have we talked much about alliance strategy? I missed the first part. I know the last half hour or so has been really focused on scouting.
Mason and Max and Andrew did share our first pick, second pick strategy for KnightKrawler, although I don't know that any other teams shared a differing strategy for that.
Trevor.
Yeah, I can share a little bit. So we were ranked a lot lower than we would have liked to be, and we pretty much by then knew that we weren't going to be an alliance captain, but we were hoping that we'd be a first pick, and we ended up being a first pick. So we were kind of scouting, like, if we get picked by an alliance captain, what teams would we want to have as a second bot? So we pretty much looked at every single LG score in the competition because there wasn't a ton. And we kind of narrowed down some of those ones we'd like, maybe some other ones that can play some defense, and what would look good in a second pick. So that when we came around, when we got selected, we had kind of an idea of what we wanted to have. And, we talked it with Rapid Acceleration about that too. And we ended up coming up with a second pick that we, I guess, looked at.
Yeah. Yeah, by the time it had wrapped around back to first seed for Northern Lights, all the LG bots were gone and had been picked. So it was very much like, all right, we got to get a good defense bot then. Yeah. So I think if you have a good algae bot, I think it's pretty much going to be guaranteed you're going to be either a first or second pick at whatever regional you go to.
Yeah, that kind of similar strategy like you guys were talking about that you wanted for yours is kind of what worked for us. Is we had two that cycled just a ton of coral and one that cycled the barge shots with the LG. And that seemed to, get a lot of points. And if there was one robot playing defense, typically it couldn't stop both of the robots from scoring. So you would always be able to kind of get around it unless it played like really, really good defense, which, can happen.
Yeah, I think what worked best from what I saw for defense is essentially just kind of parking in front of a coral station and fighting any robots that get near, rather than trying to go where the robots are, because it's, I think, a lot harder to both avoid penalties and be in effective defense. Ryan?
Yeah, 5232 was the best defender that I watched, and their strategy was essentially to line up directly in the middle of the alliance station wall and then pinball back and forth between the stations whenever a robot would get there. The reason it was effective is they had momentum at the time they got there. The robots that tended to camp out at one coral station, sure, they'd take away 30 coral, they'd take away half the field, but most alliances were pretty effective at sharing the coral station, in the playoffs in higher levels of play. Whereas 5232, they were doing some real damage and taking away a lot of points from the other alliance. So I thought that was really fun to watch.
Yeah, I think I saw a couple of those matches. I think they had a real fun time messing with their teams there.
5232 is a monster. They were really hard at defense.
Trevor?
Yeah, I was actually talking with their drive coach because they were at first intending to score, like on the coral and the reef and stuff, but stuff wasn't working out too well. So they really adapted really well to having a defense strategy, and that worked extremely well for them in the playoffs, which is always a really cool thing to see when you can adapt like that at comp.
How are people adapting to either be a better defense bot or work whether better against defense bot? I know we swapped out some of our gear ratios on our drive team to have a bit more power. How are other teams adapting?
I mean, we flat out were not prepared for defense, and that pretty much cost us our last match when we lost in the playoffs. We got a coral stuck inside of our robot, and we had to play defense, and our driver had never done defense before. So he was trying his best to do it, but you can't do a ton if you don't have a concrete idea of what you need to do, I suppose.
Yeah, it might be something good for teams to practice at driver practices and such.
I mean, even what we could do at the practice field this weekend, we could get our last year robot or something, bring it out and just try to stop that robot from getting close or something. I suppose you could don't have to actually try to score or anything, but just kind of simulate what that driving would be like and then play defense against it.
Yeah. Or have them play defense against you and to see if you can get around it easy.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because if you're playing defense, you just mostly need to drivetrain. You could always use the other robot and try to score with that robot playing defense.
I think there's a lot to be learned too from just watching what good defenses have done. I mean, last year we saw strategies evolve over the year with passing notes from one side of the field to the next. I think this pinballing back and forth that Ryan mentioned is one of those sort of evolutions of defense that people are going to that worked. We're going to start doing that. I think there's a lot to be learned from just looking at the regionals that have already been played. Okay, I'm going to make it final call. Any last comments or questions here before we wrap it up for the night? All right, big round of applause for Max and Mason and Andrew. Thank you so much. You guys stepped in literally last minute. I'm very impressed with what you guys have pulled together with 3 to 5 hours notice or whatever, how much time you worked on that today. So thank you for stepping up. It's always nice when my scramble becomes a really short scramble and turns into someone else's scramble. I've had to do it a few times. I really appreciate you guys taking the load off of me this week to come up with a new topic last minute. having said that, I'd love, please, for those on the call, consider hosting a conversation. It does not have to be a presentation. You do not need to be the expert on the topic that you want to lead a discussion about. You really just, all it takes is to come with a list of questions and say, here's what we do. Is anyone doing something better? No matter what that might be, any robot topic is available. I think at the moment, we do not have anything scheduled for the rest of the year. I suspect our battery talk that was supposed to happen tonight will get rescheduled. But at the moment, I don't believe there's any topics that are scheduled for the rest of the year. So I'd really appreciate it if anyone here has had even an idea of, you know what we should talk about? Let's talk about this. Please consider signing up and hosting a conversation. We don't expect perfection. Just collaboration is really all it takes to have a great conversation. All right, with that, once again, thank you to the strategy team from KnightKrawler, and I look forward to seeing everyone next week. Have a good night.
All right, thanks. Good night.